You've done enough, let your brother take over. Mom smirked after I built a $1 million venue from scratch. So I introduced her to my corporate lawyer, and watched her face drop. It was a Thursday, exactly 8:14 a.m. The morning fog was still sitting low and thick over the apple orchard. The lavender bushes lining the crushed gravel pathways were heavy with fresh dew, and somewhere behind the restored 19th century timber barn, one of my groundskeepers was raking the driveway into perfectly symmetrical lines. I had 3 high-end bridal consultations scheduled before noon, and a massive corporate executive team from Boston arriving by 4 p.m. for a 3-day wellness retreat. And right there, standing at the wrought iron entrance gates to my property, stood my mother. She was looking at Cedar Hollow Retreat, the sanctuary I had built from absolute ruins, the business that had broken my back, cracked my skin with frostbite, and drained my bank accounts to zero, and she was casually telling me that it belonged to my brother now. She said it in the exact same tone of voice you might use to tell someone their table at a restaurant is ready, casual, certain, completely expecting zero resistance or argument. I almost laughed out loud. I looked at her pristine silk blouse and her designer sunglasses and said, "You never wanted this place. You called it a toxic money pit." She sighed, waving her hand dismissively. "Don't be selfish, Elena. This is family property, and Julian needs it." And right then, standing in the crisp morning air of the Berkshires while the thriving, humming world I had meticulously constructed woke up around me, I finally understood something I should have realized 2 decades earlier. Some people don't actually want what you have. They just want to stop you from having it. Part 1, the definition of fair. Let me take you back 3.5 years, because the beginning of this nightmare is crucial to understanding the absolute audacity of what my family tried to pull. My father, Robert, is a man who makes family decisions the exact same way a military general moves chess pieces across a board. He acts with absolute, unwavering conviction that he is being highly strategic, and he has zero interest in whether the pawns actually agree with his moves. The most complicated thing about my father is that he isn't intentionally cruel. He isn't cold or calculating in a malicious way. He genuinely, truly believes he is doing right by his family. The problem is that he defines family in a way that has always quietly, systematically excluded me. He has 2 children. First is Julian, 35 years old. Julian is charming, standing 6'2", with the kind of effortless charisma and blinding smile that makes people completely forget what they were talking about when he walks into a room. Then there is me, Elena. I am 32. I was always the quiet one. The one who stayed in her room reading blueprints. The one who wore muddy steel-toed boots and eagerly talked about structural load-bearing walls and soil grading at fancy dinner parties while everyone else politely ignored me. I am an architect. Or, at least, I was at the time. I was a junior associate at a mid-sized, highly competitive firm in Springfield, Massachusetts, grinding 60-hour weeks working on residential renovations and commercial retrofits. I was very good at the work, but I was never particularly noticed for it. Julian, by massive contrast, was in high-stakes wealth management. He worked at a prestigious investment firm in downtown Boston. He dressed in custom-tailored Italian suits, drove a leased Porsche, and possessed a unique talent for making absolutely everything he touched look inevitable and effortless. When my grandfather passed away 3 years ago, a hard, calloused man who had farmed 25 acres in the Berkshires until his knees literally gave out, he left behind the vast property he had built his entire life on. By the time the estate logistics cleared probate, the assets passed directly to my father. And my father, in his infinite, spreadsheet-driven wisdom, decided it was time to redistribute some generational wealth to his children. He called a mandatory family dinner at a high-end steakhouse. He had the legal documents drawn up ahead of time and placed them in manila folders next to our dinner plates. Julian received a sprawling, luxury 2-bedroom penthouse apartment in a pre-war historic building in Boston's Back Bay. It came with a 24/7 doorman, original hardwood floors, a chef's kitchen, and a stunning view of the city skyline. The market value at the time was approximately $1.6 million. It was a turnkey life, handed over on a silver platter. I received the farmhouse in the Berkshires. The farmhouse was, to put it as generously as humanly possible, an absolute, unmitigated disaster. The roof had 4 active, massive leaks that had rotted the attic joists. The plumbing system hadn't been updated since 1974 and the pipes violently froze and burst every single winter. The wraparound front porch had completely collapsed on its eastern side, looking like a shattered jawbone. The massive main timber barn on the property had its roof cave in during a brutal snowstorm 5 years prior, and no one had ever bothered to repair it. The orchard, 15 acres of heritage apple trees and 1 ancient, towering weeping willow, was wildly overgrown, choked by invasive vines. The irrigation system had rusted into complete uselessness. The main house smelled aggressively of black mold, rotting timber, and whatever feral raccoons and possums had moved in during the winters my grandfather had spent decaying in an assisted living facility. My mother sipped her wine at the dinner and called the split highly practical. I will never forget her exact inflection. She said it like she was doing me a massive, charitable favor. My dad called it fair. By his logic, which he had literally mapped out on an Excel spreadsheet, the Boston apartment cost significantly more in raw monetary value, but the farmhouse had acreage and land value, so mathematically, it all evened out. The math, technically speaking, was not entirely wrong if you squinted at the property tax assessments, but the heart of the matter was entirely different. Julian took one single look at the Zillow listing of the ruined farmhouse on his phone, smirked, and said, "Perfect for you, Elena." What he actually meant was, quiet, small, forgotten, broken, not worth competing for. The deeply unspoken message, the one every single person sitting at that mahogany table understood but no one had the guts to say aloud, was that Julian needed the better thing. Julian was in Boston. Julian had the high society lifestyle, the ruthless ambition, and the carefully curated image that absolutely required a $1.6 million penthouse. He needed it the way a theatrical performance requires a grand stage. I was just the workhorse. I was the one who could make do with scraps. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply folded my hands in my lap and said, "Thank you." I didn't say thank you because I agreed with their blatant favoritism. I said it because, in my head, I had already started doing a very different kind of math. Part 2, 3 years of dirt, sweat, and silence. What happened between that dinner at the steakhouse and my mother arriving in her pearls 3 years later is not a fun, quick movie montage. It does not compress neatly into a 2-minute video with upbeat, inspirational indie music playing in the background. It was 3 solid years of the most extraordinarily unglamorous, agonizing, bone-breaking work imaginable. The very first weekend after the deed transfer cleared, I drove out to the property. I walked every single inch of those 25 acres with a yellow legal pad, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a commercial moisture meter I had secretly borrowed from my architecture firm. I made endless, terrifying lists: structural shear issues, complete plumbing failures, catastrophic electrical hazards, foundation settling that terrified me, roof integrity completely compromised. It took me 14 hours just to assess the damage. By the time I finally sat down on the collapsed, rotting porch steps with a thermos of lukewarm, bitter coffee, I had 18 densely packed pages of notes and a final estimated number in my head that made my chest painfully tighten. A proper, code-compliant commercial renovation would cost somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000. I had exactly $35,000 in my savings account. I went to my supervisor at the architecture firm, a gruff but brilliant man named David. He let me take on the farmhouse project in my off hours, partly out of sheer goodwill, and partly because he thought the before and after photos would be incredible portfolio material for the firm. He gave me that encouragement with the specific, naive enthusiasm of someone who has never been freezing cold in a house without working heat in late January. Armed with my professional architectural drawings, I marched into the local credit union. I applied for a massive small business development loan. The senior loan officer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Lynn who had worked in agricultural and commercial lending for 25 years, sat across from me. She looked at my aggressively detailed business plan, my market research on the booming New England wellness tourism industry, and my structural blueprints. She stared at me for a very long, uncomfortable moment. "You're going to do the bulk of this physical labor yourself?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "With specialized contractors only where legally required for code," I said without blinking. "But, yes. Me." She approved a $160,000 line of credit. I won't pretend that wasn't the exact moment I drove back to my tiny apartment and threw up from pure anxiety. The whole thing was suddenly, terrifyingly real. I want to be extremely precise about the reality of this work, because I think people imagine home renovation in ways that are heavily romanticized by HGTV. It is not a fun journey of discovery. It is not about finding the hidden character of a charming old house. It is primarily hauling heavy, disgusting things. It is spending 4 days straight pulling up rotted, urine-soaked floorboards and carrying them on your bruised shoulders to a massive steel dumpster in the muddy driveway. It is wearing a suffocating, sweaty respirator mask for 9 hours straight while you strip mold-blackened drywall and bag it in heavy contractor bags. It is the absolute soul-crushing despair of learning at 11:30 p.m. on a freezing Tuesday that the PVC pipes your budget plumber installed are the wrong diameter, and the entire downstairs bathroom rough-in has to be violently ripped out and redone. I slept on a deflating air mattress on the dusty floor for 14 straight months. I kept a plastic bucket directly above my head to catch the water from the main bedroom roof leak, and I had to wake up 3 times a night to empty it every time it rained. I ate almost exclusively canned soup heated on a cheap electric hot plate because the kitchen was violently gutted and non-functional for the first 10 months. My friends from the architecture firm visited exactly twice in the first year. Both times, they parked in the muddy driveway, looked at what was still, frankly, a catastrophic mess of exposed wires and torn wood, and said polite, supportive things in the careful, pitying tones of people who have absolutely no idea what they are looking at. Julian never visited. Not once. He was too busy posting photos from rooftop bars in Boston. My parents visited exactly once, in February of the first year, for approximately 45 minutes. My mother walked through the freezing, gutted downstairs, shivered in her designer coat, said, "Well, at least it has good bones, I suppose," and then immediately went to sit in the heated car until my father was done looking around. My father stared at the exposed wall framing with an expression I can only describe as polite distress. He commended my determination in the same tone you'd use to praise a child's ugly finger painting. They did not offer a single dollar of financial help. They did not offer an hour of physical labor. They offered a frozen lasagna, which I ate cold over the course of 4 days. But what they gave me, entirely without meaning to, was the very thing they thought they were punishing me with: time, space, isolation. They gave me the specific, intoxicating freedom that comes from being underestimated so completely and utterly that no one is watching your moves. Part 3. The Empire I Built. By month 18, the heavy structural work was finally done. I had a brand new architectural shingle roof, replaced, modernized plumbing throughout the entire estate. Updated 200 amp electrical panels. A completely rebuilt front porch with reinforced concrete footings. By month 22, the interiors were finally taking shape. I made aggressive, high-end design choices that my intense architecture training had prepared me for, but that still felt terrifyingly daring when it was my own borrowed money on the line. I installed wide plank, reclaimed white oak floors. I hand-plastered the walls in a warm, textured limestone tone. I blew out the front walls and installed massive, floor-to-ceiling thermal windows to perfectly frame the sweeping view of the valley. I designed a commercial-grade chef's kitchen focused on local farm-to-table sourcing, featuring deep farmhouse sinks, floating walnut shelving, and a massive, vintage cast-iron range I found secondhand and spent 3 weekends painfully restoring by hand. The collapsed barn was my biggest financial gamble. I had originally planned to just demolish the rotting wood and seed the footprint as a wildflower meadow. But one afternoon in late spring, standing inside the ruined frame with golden sunlight slicing through the broken roof slats, I visualized something else. I changed the blueprints. I rebuilt it as a luxury event space. I used reinforced steel beams hidden behind the original, salvaged timber. I installed a massive glass cupola where the old hayloft had been, flooding the space with natural light. I exposed the original stone foundation. It now had an interior capacity for 150 seated guests, complete with a state-of-the-art caterer's prep kitchen attached to the east side. I legally permitted it as a commercial event venue in month 26. The overgrown orchard took longer than anything else. I hired an expensive, brilliant arborist who had worked in New England agriculture for 40 years. He spent 2 full weeks meticulously assessing every tree. Miraculously, 13 of the 15 apple varieties were recoverable. The massive, ancient weeping willow tree in the center of the property was structurally sound and breathtaking. I had the entire orchard cleared of deadwood, aggressively pruned, and re-irrigated. I laid down a winding crushed gravel path illuminated by subtle, low-voltage solar lighting. I planted rows of French lavender along the borders. I built 4 massive, weathered wooden dining tables under the willow tree for what would become our signature outdoor dining experience: exclusive, seasonal farm-to-table dinners cooked by a private chef I poached from a high-end Boston restaurant that had closed down. The old tractor shed became a stunning, climate-controlled glass studio. 3 walls of pure thermal glass, radiant heated stone flooring, and reclaimed brick. It became an instant hit, rented out constantly by professional photographers, yoga instructors, and corporate mindfulness retreats. I officially named it Cedar Hollow Retreat. When I finally launched the sleek, professional website in month 31, I had a waiting list within 6 weeks. It started as word of mouth, then exploded when a major regional travel and lifestyle magazine did a massive 6-page spread on us. By month 34, I had a staff of 16 full-time employees with benefits, and a roster of 12 specialized contractors on rotation. I had successfully hosted 18 luxury weddings, 4 massive corporate executive retreats, and was booked solid for the next 2 years. My occupancy rate across the 12 luxury guest suites was hovering at an insane 78%. Sarah Lynn, my loan officer, called me to tell me the credit union wanted to feature Cedar Hollow Retreat in their statewide commercial as their ultimate small business success story. That call happened exactly 1 week before my mother showed up unannounced. Part 4. The 72-hour ultimatum. She arrived on a Wednesday morning. I hadn't invited her, but I had once told her she was welcome to visit any time, a polite, standing offer I made at Christmas, fully assuming she would never actually lower herself to take me up on it. I was out in the garden reviewing invoices when I heard the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel. She stepped out of her Mercedes in a crisp silk blouse and pearls. She stood at the entrance to the property for a long, heavy, utterly silent moment. I watched her from a distance. I watched the way her eyes darted over the flawlessly restored farmhouse, the blooming courtyard, the massive event barn with its glass cupola catching the morning sun. I watched her read the heavy bronze plaque at the gate. Cedar Hollow Retreat. Founder and sole owner, Elena Bennett. Private property. No unauthorized access. I had that sign legally commissioned 6 months earlier at the strict suggestion of my business attorney. At the time, I thought my lawyer was being overly paranoid. Watching my mother's face twist into something dark and complicated as she read it, I realized my lawyer was a genius. I walked over, wiping dirt from my hands. "Good morning, Mom." She turned to look at me. She didn't look at me like a proud mother. She looked at me the way a person looks at a complicated math problem they thought they had already solved, only to realize the formula was wrong. "You've done a lot," she finally managed to say. 3 years worth of a lot," I replied flatly. She demanded a tour. She walked through the entire property in near total silence, which should have been my first massive red flag. My mother is not a quiet woman. She has loud, aggressive opinions about absolutely everything. Linens, light fixtures, the font choice on a restaurant menu. She shares her critiques freely. Her absolute silence that morning was not awe or admiration. It was pure, cold calculation. We eventually sat down for coffee in the restored chef's kitchen. She asked, almost too casually, about my gross revenue. She asked if I had outside investors or corporate partners. I answered honestly, I don't know why I did. Habit, maybe? Or maybe just the pathetic, residual reflex of a daughter who still stupidly believed that information shared with a mother was safe. The conversation shifted so gradually, so smoothly, that I almost missed the knife sliding in. "Your father wants to revisit the estate arrangement," she said, taking a delicate sip of her coffee. I froze. I slowly put my mug down on the walnut counter. "What arrangement?" "The property distribution from your grandfather's passing," she said, waving her hand like she was discussing rearranging living room furniture. "Given what you've developed here, Elena, it's not really an individual, personal asset anymore. It's clearly a family business." "It is my business," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I built every square inch of it." "You built it on family land," she shot back instantly. "Land that was graciously given to you by your father." She looked at me with that specific, chilling expression she always uses, the one that means she has already made a decision and is just waiting for me to submit to it. "Julian has been struggling severely," she continued. "The Boston real estate market isn't what it was. His firm downsized. He's drowning in HOA fees and bad investments. He could really benefit from taking over something stable like this." I heard the words coming out of her mouth, but my brain refused to process the sheer audacity of them. "You want me to just give Julian my multi-million-dollar business?" "Not give, don't be dramatic," she scoffed. "A corporate restructuring. You'd still be heavily involved, of course." "Involved?" I repeated, my blood turning to ice. "Your father is willing to pay the legal fees to formalize it. Julian would step in as the CEO and manage the property and the finances, and you would receive a very generous salary to continue handling the day-to-day operations and cleaning." The words settled into the warm kitchen like toxic sludge. A salary. For my own business. A business that I had financed with my own debt, designed with my own degrees, permitted, built, staffed, and made wildly profitable from a rotting pile of garbage that no one in my family had touched or cared about in over a decade. They wanted to steal my empire and make me the maid. "No," I said. Just one word. Hard and final. She went cold. Not explosive, not screaming, but precise and terrifying, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. "You have exactly 72 hours, she said, standing up and smoothing her silk blouse. "You have 72 hours to discuss this with your father and come to a reasonable arrangement. If you refuse, we will be forced to pursue other options." "What other options?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The property transfer 3 years ago may have been made without full legal consideration of your father's long-term intentions. There are legal avenues we can take to reclaim family assets." I looked at her for a very, very long moment. The daughter in me died right there in that kitchen. The CEO took over. "You really should have brought your lawyer with you today, Mom," I said softly. "Because I already have mine." She scoffed, turned on her heel, and left without finishing her coffee. Part 5. The War Room. The minute her car disappeared down the driveway, I locked the doors, marched into my office, opened my laptop, and made 3 phone calls that would change the trajectory of my family forever. The first call was to Jessica Reed, my corporate attorney. Jessica is a ruthless, brilliant property and business attorney based in Boston who had handled my LLC formation and liability contracts from day one. She is 45, has been practicing law for 20 years, and has a voice that immediately makes you feel like the room just became legally airtight. I told her exactly what my mother had said, specifically emphasizing the phrase legal avenues to reclaim family assets. There was a brief, sharp pause on the line. I could hear Jessica typing rapidly. "The original transfer deed from 3 years ago," Jessica said, her voice dripping with absolute boredom. I'm looking at it right now. No conditions. No reversionary clauses. No family interest provisions. No stipulations of any kind. None at all? I asked. You drafted it, I just need to hear you say it. They have absolutely nothing, Elena, Jessica said firmly. The transfer was legally flawless and 100% clean. It is your land. If they attempt any legal action whatsoever, we will immediately countersue for harassment, coercion, and frivolous litigation, and we will bury them in legal fees. But here is what I want to do. I want to be sitting in the room when they come back. Good, I said, feeling the panic drain out of me, replaced by pure adrenaline. They're bringing Julian tomorrow morning. Be here at 9 a.m. The second call was to Thomas, my general manager, who I had poached from a 5-star luxury hotel group. I told him what was happening and exactly what I needed from him, his physical presence at tomorrow's ambush, and complete, overwhelming documentation of the business operations. I want the LLC formation documents, the employee contracts, the booking ledgers, the payroll records, and the vendor agreements. Printed, bound, and sitting on the boardroom table, I ordered. Consider it done, Thomas said without missing a beat. Do you want me to alert security? Not yet, I said. Just keep the corporate retreat guests happy. I don't want this drama bleeding into the guest experience. The third call was to Sarah Lynn at the credit union. I needed her on the absolute, unbreakable record. If anyone other than me, specifically my father or my brother, attempts to contact the bank to make changes to the business accounts, the loan structure, or the property deed, what happens? I asked. Sarah laughed, a dry, hardened sound. Elena, I've been in commercial lending for 25 years. I have seen entitled families try to steal a successful woman's business more times than I can count. I put a hard lock on your accounts the day you open them. We don't process a single modification without your physical presence, your government ID, and your written, notarized authorization. It's impossible. Do you want me to come down there tomorrow and tell them that to their faces? Actually, I smiled. Yes. Can you be here at 9:30? I wouldn't miss it for the world, she said. By midnight, I was lying in my bed, staring up at the beautifully restored ceiling. The exact same ceiling my grandfather had stared at. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me at first, but then it made perfect sense. I had spent 3 grueling years fixing broken things, fighting contractors, fighting the weather, and building an empire out of dirt. My mother's pathetic ultimatum was just another pile of trash I needed to haul to the dumpster. Part 6, The Ambush. They arrived at exactly 9:45 a.m. The next morning, Julian pulled up to the gate in a massive, gleaming white pickup truck that he clearly had never used for actual work. It was spotless, performatively rural, the exact kind of truck a wealthy city finance bro buys to signal a rugged masculinity he hasn't actually earned. He put the truck in park at the front gate. I watched him through the security cameras. I watched the exact moment his eyes landed on the bronze plaque, Cedar Hollow Retreat, founder and sole owner, Elena Bennett. I saw his jaw clench so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. My mother had arrived 20 minutes earlier and was waiting in her Mercedes. She got out and walked up to Julian. Together, the two of them marched up the crushed gravel path toward the main house, looking like they were preparing to accept a surrender. I walked out to meet them in the courtyard. The property looked spectacular. The glass cupola on the event barn was glowing in the morning sun. A wealthy couple was quietly drinking mimosas on the private terrace of one of the luxury suites. Julian stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes swept over the massive, sprawling, perfectly manicured estate. He didn't say a single word for almost a full minute. In that heavy silence, I could practically hear the gears in his head violently recalibrating. This is significantly bigger than I thought, he finally muttered, his voice tight. You never asked, I replied, crossing my arms. You dismissed it as a rotting farmhouse. Dad told us you did some basic renovations, Julian stammered, looking at the massive timber event barn. It's a luxury commercial retreat, I corrected him, my voice projecting clearly across the courtyard. 12 luxury guest suites, a 150-person wedding venue, a thermal glass yoga studio, 3 distinct dining experiences, full corporate event facilities, a fully operational heritage orchard, and a staff of 16. Julian looked at the bronze plaque again, then back at me. His arrogant smirk was completely gone. You've been building a massive commercial business this whole time. What exactly did you think I was doing out here in the dirt for 3 years, Julian? I asked coldly. He didn't have an answer. My mother quickly stepped in, sensing she was losing control of the narrative. Elena, enough of this. Julian is here because your father wants this restructuring resolved quietly and as a family. If Dad wanted to steal my company, he should have had the spine to come look me in the eye himself, I snapped. Julian's expression shifted to pure discomfort. He had driven out here expecting to walk into a charming, slightly run-down little bed and breakfast. Something small and quaint that he could easily slap his name on, hire a cheap manager for, and fold into his portfolio to save himself from bankruptcy. Instead, he was standing at the gates of an absolute fortress. A multi-million-dollar hospitality machine that was very clearly, legally, and aggressively mine. "Let's go inside," I said, gesturing toward the main doors. "There are some people you really need to meet." Part 7. The boardroom execution. I led them into the executive boardroom. It was the exact same room that used to be the mold-infested, rotting dining room where I had eaten canned soup off a hot plate while crying from exhaustion 2 years ago. Now, it featured a massive, custom-built 14-foot live-edge oak conference table, leather executive chairs, and framed write-ups from travel magazines on the walls. Right in the center of the wall, perfectly illuminated by a gallery light, was a large framed photograph. It was a picture of the farmhouse exactly as it had looked the day I inherited it: collapsed porch, sagging roof, black rot, and pure decay. 3 people were already sitting at the oak table when I led my mother and Julian into the room. Jessica Reed, my attorney, stood up first. She smoothed her tailored suit. "Good morning. I'm Jessica Reed. I am the senior corporate counsel representing Cedar Hollow Retreat LLC, and Elena Bennett's personal attorney." Julian stopped walking. He looked at Jessica, then at me, the blood draining from his perfectly tan face. "LLC?" he choked out. "Limited Liability Company," Jessica said, her voice dripping with dangerous, sugary sweetness. "Registered legally and flawlessly with the state of Massachusetts exactly 34 months ago. Sole managing member and 100% equity owner, Elena Bennett. The deed to this 25-acre property was transferred to Elena unconditionally. There are absolutely 0 family interest provisions, 0 reversionary clauses, and 0 shared ownership language of any kind." My mother opened her mouth to argue, her face flushing red with rage, but Jessica didn't even let her take a breath. "Furthermore," Jessica continued, her voice dropping into a lethal, authoritative register, "any attempt by you, your husband, or your son to pressure, threaten, or force Elena into transferring equity or restructuring ownership constitutes illegal coercion and extortion under state law. If you pursue this ridiculous arrangement any further, I will personally file a restraining order, followed immediately by a massive civil lawsuit for harassment." Thomas, my general manager, stood up next. He didn't smile. He just pushed a massive, 4-inch thick leather binder across the table toward Julian. "Thomas Vance, general manager," he said sharply. "Inside that binder is our current operational structure, LLC formation, payroll documentation for 16 employees, vendor contracts, and our booking ledger. We currently have 42 high-end events contracted through the next 24 months. The business is valued in the multi-millions. You cannot simply take over management of a highly regulated hospitality corporation without triggering massive legal and tax liabilities, none of which you are qualified to handle." Finally, Sarah Lynn stood up from the end of the table. Sarah Lynn, senior commercial lender, Berkshire Regional Credit Union, she said, crossing her arms. "I hold the commercial notes on this property. Per our strict lending agreements, any modifications to the business accounts, the deed, or the loan structure require Elena's exclusive, in-person, notarized authorization. If anyone in your family attempts to contact my bank again regarding these assets, I will have our fraud department flag you." The boardroom fell so quiet you could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Julian slowly sat down in one of the leather chairs. He didn't sit down like a wealthy CEO claiming his throne. He collapsed into it like a man whose knees had just given out. My mother stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched her designer purse. She looked down at the pathetic little manila folder she had brought with her, the arrangement my father had drafted that would have made me a salaried maid in my own empire. She didn't even try to open it. You planned all of this," my mother whispered, looking at me like I was a monster. She said the word planned with this bizarre, offended weight, as if a woman having the intelligence to protect herself was somehow a violent betrayal. "Yes, Mom," I said, leaning forward and placing both hands flat on the table. "That is exactly what you have to do when you build something incredibly valuable, and you know you are surrounded by thieves. We are your family," she shrieked, finally losing her composure. "I know," I replied, my voice dead calm, "which is the only reason I am letting you walk out of this room today instead of having you arrested for attempted extortion. Now get out of my building." Julian wasn't even looking at me. He was staring blankly at the framed, before, photograph on the wall, the broken house, the collapsed porch, the black mold. You really did all of that yourself?" he asked. His voice sounded completely different. The arrogant, finance bro performance was completely gone. He sounded small, with specialized contractors where code required it, and a massive commercial loan that I spent 2 years aggressively paying back, I said. Julian stared at the photo for a long time. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Then, very quietly, he said, "I wouldn't have." I looked at him, narrowing my eyes. "What?" "I wouldn't have done it," he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "If Dad had given this ruin to me, I wouldn't have fixed it. I wouldn't have survived it. I would have just sold it for scrap value. I didn't say anything back. I didn't gloat. I didn't insult him. Because in that exact moment, that was the most honest, vulnerable, and pathetic thing my golden child brother had ever said to me in his entire life. I didn't want to ruin the sheer weight of his realization. Part 8, The Aftermath. They left less than 5 minutes later. My mother didn't say goodbye. She practically sprinted to her Mercedes, slammed the door, and sped down the gravel driveway, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Julian walked slowly to his pristine, fake work truck, got in, and drove away without looking back. And then, the drama was over, and it was just a regular Thursday morning again. The wealthy couple finished their mimosas on the terrace. The groundskeeper finished raking the gravel. The distant, rhythmic sound of the prep chefs chopping vegetables echoed from the commercial kitchen. Jessica packed her briefcase, smiled at me, and said, "You've got titanium bones, Elena. In the building, and in yourself." That evening, as the sun was setting over the Berkshires, my phone rang. It was my father. I answered on the third ring. I fully expected him to scream at me, to threaten me, to demand obedience. But when he spoke, he sounded incredibly old. Not physically old, but old in the way a man sounds when the rigid, arrogant worldview he has held his entire life has just violently collapsed around him. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I know you didn't," I replied. I thought you would just patch up the roof and live a quiet, small life out there, something manageable." "I didn't think you had." He trailed off, unable to find the words for the empire I had built. "You thought Julian needed the better thing," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a cold, hard fact. The silence on the line stretched for a very long time. "I thought I was being highly practical," he finally whispered. "You were," I said. "And so was I." He exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Your mother called me screaming about lawyers. I told her to drop it. I'm not angry at you, Elena. I want you to know that whatever she tried to do today, whatever I let her try to do, it stops now. It is your property. I am so sorry we made you feel like you were the lesser child." I looked out my office window at the massive weeping willow tree at the edge of the property. The tree my grandfather had planted nearly a century ago. "Dad," I said quietly, "I want you to come visit." "I will," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "If you'll still have me. Come in the spring," I said. The orchard is extraordinary in April. Epilogue, 1 year later. It has been exactly 1 year since the ambush in the boardroom. My father did visit in late April. He drove up completely alone. He didn't even tell my mother he was coming. He spent the entire day walking the property. He stood under the massive weeping willow tree for an hour. He sat in the restored glass cupola barn, ate a farm-to-table lunch prepared by my executive chef, and just stared at the massive timber beams in total silence. At one point, we walked to the edge of the orchard, where the oldest, most gnarled apple trees grew, the ones the arborist said were barely recoverable, the ones I had spent 2 agonizing years personally nursing back to health. My father ran his hand over the rough bark of the oldest tree. "Your grandfather planted this one himself," he said softly. "I know," I said. "He would have loved what you did with this place," my father said, tears welling in his eyes. "I gave you the lesser thing, Elena. I am so sorry." "Yes, you did," I said, looking out over the multi-million-dollar estate. "But I'm grateful you did, because the lesser thing had space in it." Julian's Boston penthouse was already finished. It was beautiful, it was expensive, but it was done. This place was broken, and broken things have room for you to build something entirely new. He just nodded, finally seeing me for the first time in 32 years. As for the rest of them, my mother still keeps her distance. We see each other briefly at Thanksgiving, and we are rigidly polite, like strangers at a bus stop. There is a version of a relationship there, but the mother-daughter bond is permanently dead. Julian's life took a massive hit. The Boston real estate market tanked, his firm restructured, and he was forced to sell the $1.6 million penthouse at a massive loss just to cover his debts and HOA arrears. I heard through my dad that Julian packed up and moved to Austin, Texas, to work a mid-level job in commercial real estate. My dad says Julian is much more humbled and steady now. I genuinely hope he is. Cedar Hollow Retreat is now an absolute juggernaut. I have 22 full-time employees. We have hosted over 300 luxury events. We produce our own organic apple preserves that sell out instantly in our boutique farm shop. A major documentary crew came out last fall and filmed a segment on us for a piece on female-led hospitality empires. The framed before photograph still hangs dead center in the executive boardroom. The ruined house, the collapsed porch, the black mold, the pure despair. Wealthy corporate guests ask me about it all the time when they rent the room. "Why do you keep that horrible picture up?" they ask, sipping their artisan coffee. "Isn't it depressing to look at?" I always give them the exact same smile. "It's not a before picture," I tell them. "It is a permanent reminder of who actually does the hard work in this world, and who just shows up expecting to collect the check." Then, I smile, hand them their room keys, and go back to running my empire.